Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. I've been a police officer for nearly 12 years now, working in a mid-sized suburban town where things are usually pretty quiet. Most of my job involves traffic stops, responding to noise complaints, and occasionally breaking up bar fights on Friday nights. Nothing too crazy. That changed when I met the most entitled person I've ever encountered in my entire life. The story begins about 6 months ago. My wife and I had just finished renovating our dream home, a modest 3-bedroom craftsman-style house built in the 1940s that we'd been fixing up for the past 3 years. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was perfect for us. Hardwood floors, a cozy fireplace, and a nice yard where we could garden and have friends over for barbecues. My grandfather had left me this house when he passed away. And while it needed a lot of work, it had good bones and was in a great neighborhood. Property values had been skyrocketing lately as people moved out of the city, and our once quiet street was starting to see new faces moving in, tearing down older homes and building much larger ones. I'd received offers from developers before, sometimes slipped right under my door, offering to buy the place for well above market value. I always turned them down. This was my grandfather's home, and now it was mine. One Saturday afternoon in April, I was out front mowing the lawn when a shiny black Range Rover pulled up and parked right in front of my driveway. A woman got out, dressed like she was heading to a business meeting rather than stopping by a residential neighborhood on a weekend. Designer sunglasses, one of those luxury handbags my wife always points out in magazines, and high heels that looked uncomfortable to walk in on our uneven sidewalk. She marched right up to me with the confidence of someone who was used to getting her way. I turned off the lawnmower, figuring she was lost and needed directions. Boy, was I wrong. "Hi there, I'm interested in purchasing your property," she said without introducing herself, looking around at the freshly painted exterior with an appraising eye. "I represent a development company that's buying homes in this area. We're planning to build luxury condominiums, and your lot is perfect for our project." I smiled politely and shook my head. "Thanks, but I'm not interested in selling. This is my home." Her smile tightened a bit, like she wasn't used to being told no. "I understand your attachment, but we're prepared to make a very generous offer, well above market value." "I appreciate that, but like I said, I'm not interested. My grandfather left me this house, and my wife and I just finished renovating it." She pulled out her phone and started typing. "Let me show you what we're thinking. How does $450,000 sound?" I had to admit that was a lot more than the house was worth, but it didn't matter. "Again, thank you, but the house isn't for sale, at any price." Now her smile disappeared completely. "Look. This development is happening whether you like it or not. All your neighbors have already agreed to sell. You'd be the only holdout on the block." That wasn't true. I knew for a fact that my neighbor across the street, an elderly woman who'd lived there for over 40 years, had also refused to sell, but I didn't bother pointing that out. "That's their decision. Mine is to stay. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to finish mowing my lawn." I reached down to start the mower again, but she stepped forward, actually putting her foot on the mower to stop me. "You're not understanding me," she said, her voice taking on an edge. "This isn't really a choice. The development is going to happen. The city council has already approved the zoning changes. If you don't sell willingly, we have other ways of acquiring the property." Now that sounded suspiciously like a threat. The cop in me perked up. "Are you threatening me?" I asked calmly. She laughed, but it wasn't a friendly sound. "Of course not. I'm just explaining how these things work. Small homeowners like you don't have the resources to fight big development companies. We can make your life very uncomfortable if you refuse to cooperate. I think it's time for you to leave," I said firmly. "I'm not selling my house. Not now, not ever." She handed me a business card. "Think about it. The offer won't stay on the table forever. Call me when you come to your senses." With that, she got back in her Range Rover and drove off, leaving me standing there wondering what the hell had just happened. The business card read, "Karen Thompson, Director of Acquisitions, Urban Vision Development, LLC." I tucked it in my pocket and finished mowing the lawn, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling our conversation had left me with. That night, I told my wife about the encounter. She was concerned, but not surprised. We'd been hearing stories from other neighborhoods about aggressive developers using various tactics to pressure homeowners into selling. "Should we be worried?" she asked as we sat on our back porch enjoying the evening. "Nah," I assured her. "They can't actually force us to sell. The worst they can do is make annoying offers." I was so wrong. The next week, things started happening. First, we received a notice from the city about a supposed code violation regarding our front yard. According to the notice, our hedges were too tall and posed a visibility hazard. The thing is, we didn't even have hedges. Just some small flowering bushes that were nowhere near tall enough to block anyone's view. Then came a noise complaint, supposedly filed by multiple neighbors about loud parties and music coming from our property at all hours. This was laughable since my wife and I are probably the quietest people on the block. She's a librarian, for God's sake. The wildest it gets at our house is when we invite friends over for board games, and everyone's usually gone by 10 p.m. When I went into work, I pulled the reports on these complaints. Sure enough, they'd all been filed by the same person, someone named Kay Thompson. What a coincidence. But the real trouble started about 2 weeks after my initial encounter with Karen. I was off duty, working in my backyard, when I heard a commotion out front. I walked around to find Karen standing in my driveway with two men in suits and what looked like a contractor. "What's going on here?" I asked, crossing my arms. Karen turned around, not looking surprised to see me. "Oh, good, you're home. These gentlemen are from the city planning department, and this is our architect. We're just taking some preliminary measurements for the development." I stared at her in disbelief. "You're on my property without permission. That's trespassing. I need all of you to leave right now." The two men in suits looked uncomfortable, but Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Don't be ridiculous. This is going to be our property soon enough. We're just getting a head start on the planning." "I don't know what gave you that idea," I said, trying to keep my cool. "I've made it very clear that I'm not selling." "Your financial situation says otherwise," Karen replied smugly. "I've done my research. You had a lien placed on this property 3 years ago when you took out a loan for the renovations. You missed 2 payments last year when you were between jobs. The bank is quite interested in our offer to buy out your mortgage." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was true that we'd had some financial difficulties the previous year when I was recovering from a back injury and couldn't work full shifts for a couple of months. We'd fallen behind on some payments, but had worked out an agreement with the bank. Everything was current now. How did she know about that? "That's private financial information," I said. "And it's irrelevant. We're not behind on any payments now, and the house is not for sale. Now, I'm not going to ask you again. Get off my property." Karen stepped closer to me, lowering her voice. "Listen, I'm trying to be reasonable here. I could have just waited for you to default again, but I'm offering you a way out with your credit intact and cash in your pocket. Don't be stupid." "The only person being stupid here is you," I replied. "You're trespassing on private property after being told to leave. I'm a police officer, and I'm telling you officially that you need to go. Now." For the first time, Karen looked uncertain. "You're a cop?" "Yes." "Now leave." The men in suits were already backing away toward their car, clearly not wanting any part of this. But Karen wasn't giving up. "This changes nothing," she said. "Your little badge doesn't give you the right to obstruct progress. This development is happening. Not on my property it isn't. For the last time, get off my lawn before I arrest you for trespassing." That's when she did it. Instead of leaving, Karen stepped forward and slapped me hard across the face. The sound was so sharp it actually drew the attention of my next-door neighbor who was getting his mail. "You think you're so special with your badge in your grandfather's house," Karen shouted. "You're nothing! I've dealt with people like you before. Everyone has a breaking point. Everyone sells eventually." I stood there for a moment, stunned that this had actually escalated to physical assault. Then my training kicked in. I grabbed her wrist as she wound up for another slap, turned her around, and had her in handcuffs before she could process what was happening. "Karen Thompson, you're under arrest for assault on a police officer and criminal trespass. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." I continued reading her rights as she screamed and thrashed. The men who had accompanied her stood frozen by their vehicles, clearly shocked by the turn of events. "You can't do this!" Karen shrieked. "Do you know who I am? My husband plays golf with the mayor. I'll have your badge for this." My neighbor had his phone out and was recording the whole thing. "I got it all on video," he called over. "She definitely hit you first." I nodded my thanks and called for a patrol car to come pick her up. While we waited, Karen alternated between threats and attempts to bargain her way out of the situation. "This is all a misunderstanding," she said, suddenly much calmer. "I was just frustrated. You pushed my buttons. We can forget this happened. I'll even up my offer on the house by another $50,000. "You assaulted a police officer," I replied. "That's a felony. And you were trespassing after being repeatedly told to leave. This isn't going away with an apology or a bribe." When the patrol car arrived, my colleague Officer Martinez stepped out, raising his eyebrows when he saw me standing there with a handcuffed woman in designer clothes. "Having an interesting day off?" he asked with a smirk. "You could say that," I replied. "This woman assaulted me after trespassing on my property. I've already read her rights." Martinez nodded and took custody of Karen, who had now moved on to crying and claiming she was the real victim. As they put her in the back of the patrol car, I handed Martinez my neighbor's phone number so they could get the video evidence. I thought that would be the end of it. Karen would face charges, learn her lesson, and find some other neighborhood to terrorize. But if anything, this incident just seemed to make her more determined. The next day, a man in an expensive suit showed up at the police station while I was on duty. He introduced himself as Karen's husband, a prominent attorney in the city. He tried to convince my captain to drop the charges, arguing that it was all a misunderstanding and that I had provoked his wife. Thankfully, my captain watched the video and didn't buy it. Your wife clearly assaulted one of my officers on his own property after refusing multiple requests to leave, my captain told him. The DA is already reviewing the case. There's nothing I can do, even if I wanted to. Karen's husband left furious, but not before threatening a lawsuit against both me personally and the department. I wasn't worried about that. The video evidence was clear, but I was concerned about what other tactics they might try. I didn't have to wait long to find out. The next week, we received a notice from the city that our property was being considered for eminent domain as part of a community improvement project. According to the notice, the city was planning to build a new park and community center in our neighborhood, and our house was within the proposed area. This was clearly Karen pulling strings, probably through that golfing buddy mayor she'd mentioned, but eminent domain requires a legitimate public purpose and fair compensation. It can't be used to take property just to hand it over to a private developer. I knew the law, and I was prepared to fight. I contacted a friend who worked as a real estate attorney, and she agreed to help us pro bono. She filed a request for all public records related to this supposed park project, including when it had been proposed, what studies had been done, and how the specific properties had been selected. Meanwhile, Karen was released on bail pending her trial for assault. Despite being ordered to stay away from me and my property, I would occasionally spot her Range Rover driving slowly past my house. Each time I documented it and reported the violation to the court. Things came to a head at a city council meeting 3 weeks later. The proposed park project was on the agenda, and my wife and I showed up prepared. We weren't the only ones. Many of our neighbors came too, concerned about what was really going on. Karen and her husband were there, sitting near the front, looking confident. When it was time for public comments, I stepped up to the microphone. I identified myself as both a resident and a police officer, and then I laid out everything that had happened. Karen's initial attempt to pressure me into selling, the false complaints, the trespassing, the assault, and now this suspicious eminent domain proposal that conveniently affected properties that had refused to sell to Urban Vision Development. I'd like to know, I concluded, when this park was first proposed, because until I received a notice last week, I'd never heard anything about it, and I find it very interesting that the only properties being considered are ones that refuse to sell to a private developer who happens to be married to someone who claims to play golf with the mayor. There was a murmur through the crowd. The mayor, who had been looking increasingly uncomfortable during my statement, cleared his throat. "These are serious allegations," he said, "but I can assure you that all city projects are undertaken with proper procedure and public input." That's when my attorney stood up. "Then you won't mind explaining why there's no record of this park project in any city planning documents prior to 2 weeks ago? Or why the preliminary drawings for the park have Urban Vision Development's watermark on them?" She held up copies of documents we'd obtained through our records request. The council members looked genuinely surprised. It seemed the mayor had been working on this without their knowledge. One of the council members, an older woman I recognized from community events, spoke up. "Mayor Richards, is this true? Are we using the city's eminent domain power to benefit a private developer?" The mayor stammered something about public-private partnerships and misunderstandings, but it was clear he'd been caught. Karen's husband stood up and tried to take control of the narrative, talking about how their development would bring jobs and tax revenue to the area, but the damage was done. Another council member called for an immediate investigation into the proposed eminent domain action and any other dealings between the mayor and Urban Vision Development. The motion passed, with only the mayor abstaining. As we left the meeting, Karen and her husband tried to approach me, but a couple of uniformed officers who had been in attendance stepped between us, reminding her about the no-contact order. The look of fury on her face as she was once again thwarted was something I'll never forget. Over the next few months, everything unraveled for Karen and her husband. The investigation revealed that the mayor had indeed been accepting gifts and campaign contributions in exchange for favorable treatment of Urban Vision's projects. Several city employees came forward with stories of being pressured to fast-track approvals or overlook code violations for the company's developments. Karen's assault case proceeded to trial, where the video evidence made it an open and shut case. She was convicted of assault on a peace officer and criminal trespass, receiving a suspended sentence, probation, and community service. Her real punishment came when the state licensing board suspended her real estate license pending an ethics investigation. Urban Vision Development found itself under scrutiny from state regulators looking into their business practices. It turned out we weren't the first homeowners they had harassed and intimidated into selling. Multiple lawsuits were filed against the company, and they eventually declared bankruptcy. As for the mayor, he resigned in disgrace after the investigation revealed the extent of his corruption. He's currently facing charges related to bribery and abuse of office. My wife and I still live in our little craftsman house. We finished planting a garden in the backyard last spring, just like we'd planned. Sometimes I look out at what we've built together and think about how close we came to losing it all to greed and corruption. The neighbors who did sell to Urban Vision before everything fell apart were able to buy back their properties at a reduced price after the company went bankrupt. Our street is whole again, and there's a real sense of community now that we've all been through this together. Last week I was out front raking leaves when a new Range Rover, not black but silver, drove slowly down our street. For a moment my heart rate spiked until I realized it was just someone who'd recently moved into the neighborhood. Old habits die hard, I guess. The most satisfying part of all this? The city actually did end up building a small park, but not where Karen and the corrupt mayor had planned. Instead, they bought a vacant lot at the end of our street and turned it into a community garden. My wife and I volunteer there on weekends, teaching kids from the neighborhood how to grow vegetables. Sometimes justice works out exactly as it should, and sometimes when entitled people slap a cop, they get exactly what they deserve. Edit. Wow, I didn't expect this post to blow up. Thanks for all the supportive comments. To answer some common questions. 1. Yes, Karen and her husband are still together, but they moved to another city after everything went down. 2. No, I didn't lose my job or face any repercussions for arresting her. My department fully supported me after reviewing the evidence. 3. Several people have asked if I'm worried about retaliation. Not really. Karen can't come near me or my property as part of her probation, and I think she learned her lesson about messing with people who know the law. 4. For those asking about the development company, yes, several former employees have been charged with various fraud-related offenses. The case is still working its way through the courts. 5. And yes, my face did sting from the slap, but my pride hurt worse. Never expected to be assaulted over a house I wasn't even selling. The next one is a malicious compliances story. I bought a PlayStation 5 for my cousin back in my home country last year. I live in the Middle East, and whenever I visit my family in my home country, I often go with gifts. I recently started on my first, somewhat well-paying job and decided to get something nice for the family home. I got my little cousin brother a PS5. My cousin is 16. We had been playing on my account due to the lack of games in his. We hadn't had time to go and buy any that he liked yet, and his mom wouldn't let him go and buy any for himself till after the week of his exams, which were a couple weeks after I had to return to the Middle East. The trip was nice. My cousin was very happy with the gift. We'd spend a few hours at night playing against each other on FIFA. Now, this one time my cousin was at school and I decided I'd hop on one of my games and finish the story. The game I was playing was God of War Ragnarok. Apparently it was one of the games he wanted to play. Now, the issue was, he saw me playing that game on his PS5 when he returned home from school and went apeshit. His words were, "Don't touch my PS5. He meant when he's not around because he wants to play the games himself and not get the saves messed up or something. But he didn't mention that at first. I told him this was my account. The saves are already on the cloud and connected to mine. He can get a fresh start on his account later, it's not a big deal. He said he didn't care, and repeated that he didn't want me to touch his PS5 when he was at school. I tried to explain once again, and he screamed at me that if that's all it is, then get your precious account off my PS5. At this point, I was done with his tantrum anyway. Cue malicious compliance. I deleted my account from his PS5 and told him I won't touch it anymore. He was smug about me taking the L then, but later that night when he got around to try and play the games, well, all my games were now locked out on his account. He tried to access my account, but well, that's no longer on it. He doesn't know the password, and I have two-factor authentication anyway. He even went on the store to check the price of the game he wanted to play, but, well, what money was he going to use to buy them? Finally, he came up to me and nonchalantly asked me if I want to play FIFA together again. I smirked internally and responded that I won't touch his PS5. He can play on his own. He tried to convince me that it'd be fun, and said that he can beat me in a few matches and all that. I said the same thing. I am not touching that PS5 again. He realized finally that he'd be effectively locked out of playing anything except Astro's Playroom for the next couple weeks if I don't get my account on it again. His mom knew what had happened and had asked me to not put my account on it again anyway. He needed to focus on his upcoming exams. So I didn't. No matter how much he begged me, I let him stew with no games, with the PS5 teasing, all the while I enjoyed the rest of my vacation with the rest of my family. The next one is an entitled people story. For the record, I'm from Singapore, so the English might be A. We had an open house at the fire station where a number of the general public are allowed to enter the station to have a brief rundown on what the firefighters do and view their vehicles. There was this family, not going to include the race because I really think it's just down to your general behavior, nor do I want to generalize, the race, whose kids kept cutting in the line and was just generally overly excited, kids am I right, and constantly asking if the basket lift ladder thing could go up. Their dad just stood at the side. My son and his cousin was on it. We were trying to take photos, and the mother encouraged her kids to get in it. Again, their kids kept asking to have the thing go up, and my son, being a barely 2-year-old toddler, tried to touch everything on that thing. I had to raise my voice loud enough to tell him not to touch anything, which ended up spooking the other kids and my nephew. Oops, as they got off. The mom may have given me the side eye, but whatever. Dad wasn't paying attention to them either. Anywho, we went to the ambulance next, and a lady with her kid was right behind us as we got onto the ambulance. Cue the rowdy kids cutting in line and trying to get onto the ambulance. This time my sister got pissed off and went rather loudly, "Excuse me, can you not see there are people inside? Wait your turn." I think that did it for the kids, and they immediately waited for their turn. As I was taking a photo of both my nephew and son, I noticed the lady's face souring, so I quickly and quietly told the kids to queue up behind the lady since they got there first before them. Surprisingly, they listened and went behind the ladies. The dad must have seen the whole thing because he told them to wait for their turn in a hushed tone. Everyone was giving them the stink eye the whole time until the event ended. Their youngest was the only well-behaved kid. Also, my kid ain't a saint either. He was blowing up, screaming and crying because he wanted to get on a few vehicles, but I was incredibly apologetic to anyone that had to hear his siren screech and would immediately remove him from the vehicle and/or location. This family? It was only after being told off by us did the dad finally step in. Their mom just glared at us until we had to head back at 11 a.m. Honestly, rein your kids in. They aren't the only ones here to see the vehicles and try out the activities. To add, my son cried as we exited the fire station. He really wanted to hear the sirens turned on just once. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll